6 Messerschmitts close from above, guns already firing. The bomber shudders. Tracer rounds slice past the windscreen in silver streaks. The crew braces for impact, then the pilot does something no manual permits, something that should rip the wings clean off. The aircraft inverts, drops like a stone, and in 15 seconds every enemy fighter overshoots. They are alone in empty sky. Survival through defiance. But the questions remain. How did he know it would work? And why did the Air Force try to bury what happened next? Spring of 1943. The skies over occupied Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe. American bomber crews fly in tight formations, relying on mutual firepower and altitude discipline. The doctrine is clear: stay in formation, maintain speed, trust the group. Any deviation invites disaster. Fighters exploit chaos. Stragglers die alone. The 8th Air Force loses men faster than it can train replacements. Each mission is a lottery. Flak bursts below, fighters dive from above. The bombers lumber forward, heavy with fuel and ordnance, unable to maneuver like the sleek single-engine hunters stalking them. Survival depends on discipline, on following orders, on doing exactly what the manual prescribes. But manuals are written by men who have never felt tracer fire punch through aluminum at 20,000 feet. They are written in offices, far from the cold, thin air where physics and terror converge. And in that gap between doctrine and reality, men die. The bomber groups operate from English air bases scattered across the countryside, runways carved from farmland, Nissen huts clustered in the mud. Before dawn, engines cough to life. Ground crews swarm the planes, loading bombs, checking fuel lines, sealing gun turrets. The smell of high-octane gasoline mixes with exhaust and wet earth. Crews stand in small clusters, smoking, not speaking much. Some write letters, some stare at nothing. The briefings are terse: target location, expected flak concentrations, fighter activity, return routes. The intelligence officers speak in measured tones, but everyone knows the statistics. 1 in 4 won't finish their tour. Some days, the losses are worse. The numbers are abstract until you see the empty bunks. Until you hear the silence at breakfast. The bombers lift off in sequence, forming up over the channel. The formation tightens, wings tucked close. Sunlight glints off plexiglass turrets. From below, they look invincible. From inside, they feel fragile. Thin skin stretched over fuel tanks and bombs. One lucky burst can turn a fortress into a fireball. The Luftwaffe knows this. Their tactics are ruthless and refined. Head-on attacks from 12 o'clock high. Diving passes exploiting blind spots. Concentrated fire on the lead aircraft to scatter the formation. Once the box breaks apart, the wolves pick off the strays. It is mathematics, it is murder, it is efficient. American doctrine offers no escape clause. If you are attacked, you hold course. You trust your gunners. You rely on the formation's combined firepower to drive the fighters away. And if that fails, you pray. The manual forbids evasive maneuvers at altitude. A heavy bomber is not a fighter. It cannot roll, cannot snap turn, cannot dive without structural risk. Or so the thinking goes. But thinking is shaped by assumption, and assumptions are often wrong. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. His name was Robert Harper, 24 years old, raised in rural Pennsylvania, the son of a crop duster. He learned to fly before he learned to drive. His father's biplane was older than he was, patched and repainted a dozen times, held together by skill and stubbornness. Young Robert spent summers in the cockpit, flying low over cornfields, feeling the aircraft respond to every shift in wind and weight. Crop dusting is not glamorous. It is precise. You fly at treetop level, threading between power lines and barns, reading the air like a language. Margins are thin. Mistakes are immediate. The plane becomes an extension of your body. You learn what it can and cannot do, not from a manual, but from the feedback loop of stick and rudder and engine hum. Harper's father taught him a principle that had no official name but governed every flight. The aircraft will tell you its limits if you listen. Push too far, and it will warn you. Ignore the warnings, and it will kill you. But within those limits, there is more room than most pilots believe. The trick is knowing where the edge is without crossing it. When the war came, Harper enlisted in the Army Air Forces. His test scores were exceptional. His instructors noted his smoothness on the controls. He transitioned to multi-engine bombers with little difficulty. The B-17 was heavier, more complex, but the principles were the same. Feel the aircraft, anticipate its responses, respect its limits without fearing them. He deployed to England in early 1943, assigned to the 381st Bomb Group. His crew was green but capable. Navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, 5 gunners, 10 men packed into a machine designed for endurance, not comfort. They flew their first missions over France, factories, rail yards, oil depots. Each time they returned. Harper's flying was steady, unremarkable, exactly what command wanted. But he noticed things, small discrepancies between what the manuals said and what actually happened. Fighters attacked from angles the doctrine didn't anticipate. Evasive action, when taken instinctively by panicked pilots, sometimes worked. Sometimes the wild jink of a wounded bomber spoiled a fighter's aim long enough to survive. These moments were dismissed as luck. Harper suspected otherwise. He began reading aircraft performance data, engineering specs, structural load tolerances. He asked the ground crews questions. How much stress could the wing spars handle? What were the actual G limits, not the conservative estimates in the manual? The mechanics humored him. Most pilots didn't care about numbers, they cared about getting home. Harper cared about both. He sketched diagrams in a notebook, calculated roll rates, estimated dive angles. He was not trying to invent a new tactic. He was trying to understand what the aircraft could do if pushed, not recklessly, precisely. His co-pilot once asked him why he bothered. The formation would protect them. Harper didn't argue, but he kept the notebook. April 7th, 1943. The target was a submarine pen on the French coast. Intelligence reported moderate flak, possible fighter interception over the channel. The weather was clear, visibility unlimited. A textbook mission. Harper's bomber, call sign Baker 27, lifted off at 0600. The formation assembled without incident. 18 aircraft in tight box formation. Gunners test-fired their weapons over the channel. Spent casings glittered in the slipstream, falling into gray water below. They crossed the French coast to 22,000 feet. Flak began almost immediately, black puffs blooming in clusters. The formation held steady. Bomb bay doors opened. The bombardiers hunched over their northern sights, making final adjustments. The aircraft slowed, vulnerable, committed to the run. Then the fighters came. Not from above, not head-on. They came from the sun. 6 Messerschmitt Bf-109s in a shallow dive, targeting the rear of the formation. The tail gunners called them out, voices tight over the intercom. Harper's top turret gunner opened fire. Tracers arced outward, a bright thread against pale sky. The lead fighter focused on Baker 27. Cannon rounds stitched across the right wing. Hydraulic fluid sprayed in a fine mist. The No. 3 engine shuddered, coughed, and died. Harper feathered the propeller. The bomber sagged, losing altitude, falling behind the formation. Standard doctrine was clear. If you lose an engine, attempt to maintain formation speed. If you cannot, descend gradually and head for home. Do not make sudden maneuvers. Do not break formation unless structurally compromised. Harper did not descend gradually. He held altitude, coaxing the remaining engines. The formation pulled ahead, unable to slow for a cripple. Within seconds, Baker 27 was alone. Exposed, the fighters regrouped. They had time now. No formation guns to worry about, just one wounded bomber and 10 men who could not run. Harper's gunners fired in disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition. The fighters circled, probing for blind spots. One made a pass from 4 o'clock low. Cannon fire punched through the tail section. The tail gunner stopped transmitting. The intercom went silent on his channel. The engineer called out damage, hydraulics failing, oxygen lines severed in the waist, rudder controls sluggish. Harper acknowledged each report with single words. His voice was calm. The crew took their cues from him. Another pass, this time from dead astern. Rounds ripped through the fuselage. The radio operator slumped over his desk, blood spreading across maps and code sheets. The navigator applied pressure to the wound, shouting for the first aid kit. 4 fighters remained. They had altitude and speed. Baker 27 had neither. The bomber could not outrun them, could not outclimb them. The gunners were good, but ammunition was finite and the fighters knew it. They would make pass after pass until the bomber came, apart, or went down. Harper scanned the sky. No friendly fighters in sight. The formation was miles ahead, already beginning its turn for home. The coast was minutes away, but minutes were too long. The fighters were repositioning for a coordinated attack. Once they committed, it would be over. The manual offered no solution for this. You could not negotiate with physics. You could not wish away a 6 versus 1 engagement. The doctrine assumed you stayed in formation. If you fell out, you died. That was the equation. But Harper had spent months questioning equations. He saw them setting up. 6 fighters splitting into 2 groups. 3 would attack from high, forcing the gunners to track upward. 3 would come in low, exploiting the distraction. It was textbook. It worked. Unless the bomber was not where they expected it to be. Harper's hand moved to the trim wheel. He nudged the control column forward, testing. The bomber responded, nose dipping slightly. He felt the airspeed increase. The airframe vibrated, a low hum through the seat and pedals. The wings flexed. The aircraft was still whole, still listening. His co-pilot glanced over, confusion crossing his face. Harper told him to tighten his harness. Then he called the crew over the intercom. Secure everything. Brace for maneuvers. No time to explain. The engineer started to ask a question. Harper cut him off. Just do it. The fighters began their run. 3 from above, 3 from below. Nose guns already flickering. The range was closing fast. Harper could see the lead fighter's canopy. Could imagine the German pilot's focus, the slight pressure on the trigger, the certainty of the kill. Harper shoved the control column forward. Hard. The nose dropped like a guillotine. The horizon vanished. The altimeter unwound in a blur. 22,000 feet, 20,019. The airspeed indicator surged past redline. The wings groaned under the load. Rivets sang a high metallic note. The co-pilot grabbed the armrests, eyes wide. Then Harper rolled. Full aileron. The bomber inverted, belly to the sky, wings perpendicular to the earth. For a moment, they hung weightless. Then gravity took hold. The dive steepened. 15,000 feet, 13. The fighters overshot, all 6. They had committed to an attack vector that assumed the bomber would hold course and altitude. No bomber inverted, no bomber dove vertically. The maneuver was not in their training. It was not in anyone's training. Harper counted 3 seconds. Then he reversed the controls. Aileron back, column centered. Power to the remaining engines. The bomber rolled upright, still diving, still accelerating. The wings shook. The fuselage creaked. Somewhere aft, something metal snapped loose and clattered against the interior. He began the pull-out. Smooth, steady back pressure on the column. The nose lifted. The G-forces built. He felt his vision narrow, gray creeping in from the edges. The co-pilot grunted, straining against the pressure. The airframe screamed, but it held. 10,000 feet, 9. The dive flattened. The airspeed bled off. Harper leveled at 8,000 feet, wings steady, engines still running. Above them, 6 fighters circled in confusion. The bomber had simply vanished from their attack comm. By the time they reoriented, Baker 27 was 2 miles away, low and fast, heading for the channel at full throttle. The fighters did not pursue. Fuel was limited. The bomber was no longer an easy kill. They turned back toward occupied France, leaving the crippled fortress to limp home. Harper checked his instruments. Airspeed normal, altitude stable, 3 engines running rough but functional. He called for damage reports. The crew responded one by one, voices shaky, disbelieving. The tail gunner was dead. The radio operator was unconscious but alive. Everything else was intact. The co-pilot stared at Harper. He asked how Harper knew the wings wouldn't fold. Harper said he didn't. Not for certain. But he knew they wouldn't fold at that speed and that angle if the pullout was smooth. The math worked. The structure was sound. And there was no other choice. They crossed the channel in silence. The English coast appeared through haze, green and impossibly calm. Harper guided the bomber to their home field. Gear down, flaps extended. The landing was smooth. The crew climbed out slowly, legs unsteady, hands still trembling. Ground crews ran to meet them, eyes fixed on the shredded tail, the holed fusillade, the blood on the waist gun windows. Harper shut down the engines. He sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands resting on the control column. Then he pulled out his notebook and wrote down everything that had happened. The debriefing was tense. Intelligence officers listened to Harper's account without expression. They asked him to repeat the sequence of the maneuver. He did. They asked if he had been trained to perform inverted dives in a B-17. He had not. They asked if he understood that such a maneuver violated operational guidelines. He did. The squadron commander was present, a career officer, older, cautious. He told Harper the maneuver was reckless, that he had endangered his crew, that he was lucky the aircraft hadn't disintegrated. Harper did not argue. He simply said that staying straight and level would have killed them all. The fighters had the advantage. The only option was to change the equation. The commander asked what he meant by that. Harper explained the geometry. The fighters' attack vector, the time required for them to reacquire a target after an overshoot, the structural tolerances of the B-17 under negative and positive G-loads. He cited the engineering data, the load factors, the margin between redline and failure. The officers exchanged glances. This was not the language of a reckless cowboy. This was analysis, deliberate, informed, but it was still unauthorized. The commander told Harper he would consider recommending a commendation for bringing his crew home. But he also made it clear that the maneuver was not to be repeated. Doctrine existed for a reason. Individual initiative could not replace coordinated tactics. If every pilot started improvising, formations would collapse, chaos would follow. The war would be lost. Harper acknowledged the order. He did not mention the notebook. Over the following weeks, rumors spread through the bomber groups. A pilot had inverted a fortress, dodged 6 Breiteres, brought his crew home against impossible odds. The story grew in the telling, embellished, distorted. Some pilots dismissed it as fantasy. Others were curious. A few quietly asked Harper how he did it. He shared what he knew, not as a tactic, as information. He showed them the performance charts, explained the physics, emphasized the risks. The maneuver was not a magic trick. It required precision. It required understanding the aircraft's limits. It required accepting that sometimes the manual was wrong. Some pilots tested pieces of it. Steeper dives during attacks, sharper banks. Nothing as extreme as a full inversion, but deviations nonetheless. And they found that the aircraft could handle more than doctrine allowed. That agility, even in a heavy bomber, was possible. Command noticed. Losses in Harper's squadron were lower than average. Crews were returning from encounters that should have been fatal. The tactics were irregular, but the results were difficult to ignore. An engineering team was dispatched from Wright Field. They interviewed Harper, reviewed his notes, ran stress tests on returned bombers. They confirmed that the B-17 could, under specific conditions, sustain maneuvers beyond its published limits. The safety margins built into the design were more conservative than necessary. The aircraft was tougher than anyone realized, but toughness alone was not enough. The maneuvers required skill and judgment. Pushing the aircraft too far would still result in structural failure. The line between survival and catastrophe was thin. Most pilots lacked the experience to walk that line safely. The engineering team recommended against codifying the maneuver into doctrine. Too risky, too dependent on individual skill. Better to maintain formation discipline and accept the statistical losses. Harper was not surprised. Institutions resist change, especially when change originates from the bottom. He continued flying missions, continued surviving, and quietly, other pilots continued learning. By the summer of 1943, the air war over Europe had shifted. The Luftwaffe was still deadly, but American bomber crews were adapting. Formations flew tighter, gunners improved, escort fighters began appearing in greater numbers, and a small but growing number of pilots had learned that their aircraft could do more than the manual claimed. The impact was difficult to quantify. No official reports cited Harper's maneuver as a tactical innovation. No training films demonstrated the technique. But mission logs showed patterns. Bombers that should have been lost were returning. Crews that should have been killed were walking away. The survival rate in certain squadrons crept upward, a few percentage points that translated to dozens of lives. Harper completed his tour in December of 1943. 35 missions. His crew, minus the 2 lost on April 7th, survived intact. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation praised his courage and airmanship, but made no mention of the inversion. Officially, it had not happened. After the war, Harper returned to Pennsylvania. He did not speak much about his service. Like many veterans, he found civilian life both familiar and strange. He worked as a flight instructor for a time, teaching young pilots the fundamentals his father had taught him. Feel the aircraft, know its limits, respect them without fearing them. In the decades that followed, aviation technology advanced far beyond the war years. Jets replaced props. Computers replaced instinct. Doctrine became more sophisticated, more data-driven. The idea of a pilot improvising a combat maneuver in a heavy bomber seemed quaint, almost reckless by modern standards. But the principle remained. Systems fail. Plans collapse. Survival often depends on someone willing to question assumptions and act when the manual offers no answers. Harper's maneuver was not about breaking rules. It was about understanding them well enough to know when they no longer applied. Historians later studied the air campaign over Europe, analyzing loss rates and tactical evolution. Some noted the anomalies in certain squadrons, the unexplained survivals, the scattered reports of unconventional maneuvers. A few researchers tracked the pattern back to Harper, to that April mission, to 15 seconds that should not have worked. The records were fragmentary. The official narrative had moved on, but the evidence was there for those who looked. Pilots who flew with Harper, ground crews who repaired his aircraft, engineers who quietly revised their load estimates after reviewing the data he provided. One historian interviewed Harper in the early 1980s. By then, he was in his 60s, still flying occasionally, crop dusters and small charters. When asked about the maneuver, he downplayed it, said he got lucky, said the aircraft did the work. But when pressed, he admitted something else. He said that in war, you learn quickly that authority and expertise are not the same thing, that the people making the rules are often far from the problem, that survival sometimes requires you to trust your own judgment over someone else's certainty. He did not advocate recklessness. He advocated competence. And competence, he said, means knowing what you don't know and being willing to learn even when it contradicts what you were taught. The interview was never published. Harper did not seek attention. He had no interest in being remembered as a maverick or a hero. He had simply been a pilot who understood his aircraft and refused to accept that death was inevitable. Robert Harper died in 1994. The obituaries were brief: veteran, pilot, instructor. The war was mentioned in passing, a line in a long life. No monuments were erected, no airfields named in his honor. The story of Baker 2-7 faded into the vast archive of unremembered moments that collectively shaped the outcome of the war. But the lesson persists. In every conflict, in every crisis, there are people who see what others miss, who question when questioning is dangerous, who act when action seems impossible. They are not reckless. They are precise. They understand the system well enough to know when the system is wrong. Harper's 15 seconds were not magic. They were physics, skill, and the willingness to test an idea when the cost of inaction was certain death. He did not invent a new technology. He did not command armies. He simply flew his aircraft better than anyone thought possible, and in doing so, he expanded the boundaries of what could be done. The broader legacy is harder to measure. How many pilots survived because they learned from Harper? How many missions succeeded because someone dared to deviate from doctrine? The numbers are unknowable. The ripple effects of individual courage rarely appear in official histories, but wars are not won by doctrine alone. They are won by the accumulated decisions of individuals under pressure, making choices that textbooks cannot anticipate. Harper's story is one thread in that larger tapestry. A reminder that innovation often comes from the edge, from the people closest to the problem, from those willing to risk censure for the chance to survive. The B-17 that Harper flew on April 7, Baker 2-7, was repaired and returned to service. It flew 40 more missions before being scrapped in 1945. The wings that should have folded held firm every time. The airframe that should have failed endured. Decades later, aviation engineers would study wartime bombers with renewed interest. They marveled at the structural resilience, the over-engineering that saved lives, the margins of safety that were greater than the designers ever advertised. Harper had intuited what the data would later confirm. The aircraft was stronger than fear allowed people to believe. In the end, his story is not about defiance for its own sake. It is about the quiet courage required to trust your own analysis when everyone else insists you are wrong. It is about the space between recklessness and caution, where competence and improvisation meet. It is about 15 seconds that redefined what was possible, not because the rules changed, but because one person understood them well enough to see past them. The sky over occupied Europe claimed thousands of lives, but not Harper's, not that day, because when the doctrine failed, when the formation scattered, when the fighters closed in, he did not accept the inevitable. He calculated, he acted, and he lived. That is the inheritance, not fame, not recognition, but the stubborn insistence that survival is a choice, even when the odds suggest otherwise, that knowledge matters, that precision matters, that sometimes the only way forward is through a maneuver no one believes is possible. Harper never sought to be a legend. He was simply a crop duster's son who learned to listen to his aircraft, who trusted math over fear, and who proved that the line between life and death is often thinner and more negotiable than anyone dares to imagine.